Today we're going to be talking about what to do if your ex resents you. And really the purpose of this video is to accomplish three things. Number one is we're going to first determine if your ex is likely to resent you after a breakup. But we're also going to kind of dive into the psychology behind someone who resents you and how to overcome that psychology. So let's tackle the big question first. Does your ex resent you? Well, the short answer is probably. Your ex probably resents you. The long answer takes a little bit of explaining to do, and in order to explain it, we must understand the psychology behind resentment. But real quick, before you continue on this video, probably if you're sitting there and wondering what you should be doing in your specific situation, my best piece of advice for you is to actually stop by our website, www.exgirlfriendrecovery.com, and take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz. It's a simple, free, 2-minute quiz that's designed to basically tell you what kind of chance you have of getting your ex-girlfriend back, so you know whether or not you should be trying to get them back or trying to move on. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, finding a way to take the quiz is actually very easy. Simply look in the description below and find the blue link you see there and click on it. It's that simple. So again, if you want to take the Ex Recovery Chances quiz and find out what your chances are of getting your ex-girlfriend back, simply look in the description link below and click it. All right, let's get you back to your video. So let's first start by defining what resentment is. Resentment over a long period of time can be an unhealthy response to injustice, sometimes an injustice that simply won't quit, such as continual demeaning comments from a partner or the unreasonable demands of a boss who just doesn't get it. In essence, resentment really stems from a lack of communication on one or both parties. One party thinks something, the other party doesn't understand it, but the party who thinks something doesn't communicate it, and then you have a bunch of resentment. Now, what's really interesting we find about resentment is even present in exes who break up with you. Now, I've made no qualms about the fact that most of the clients that come to us are the ones being broken up with. But ever so often, we will work with a client who's done the breaking up with. And what we find is there's even resentment on their part because, quote unquote, you made me do it. And ultimately, if you want to dive into the psychology behind resentment, you need to first look at communication. Now, let's kind of springboard the communication idea because believe it or not, communication is one of the best ways in which you can overcome resentment from your ex. So, how do you defeat resentment? Simply put, you're going to use something that we like to call tactical empathy, which is tactically communicating with your ex in a way that shows them you understand exactly where they're coming from. Probably the best way I can describe this is think of the difference between communicating with your best friend and communicating with someone who is a friend but doesn't know you as well as your BFF, right? What's interesting is when you have a best friend, they understand exactly where you're coming from. They'll sometimes understand what you say before you actually say it, and you understand this, and it just kind of bonds you closer together. All your best friend has done is tactical empathy. Your best friend is empathizing with you. Now, some best friends will sympathize with you, and what we're finding works better in communicating with an ex is actually not sympathy, but empathy. Well, why? Well, people who tend to have a sympathy mindset also have a tendency to try to fix things. They're thinking, okay, I understand where you're coming from. How can I make it better? The important thing though is if you fix your ex's problems, resentment can still be there. It's actually better to approach your ex from an empathy standpoint. By simply understanding what they're going through, you're opening the lines of communication to defeat resentment. Now, defeating resentment can usually happen by doing 3 simple things with tactical empathy. Thing number 1, effective pauses. Now, this may seem like a simple concept when you hear it at first, but when I actually heard about this, I thought the same thing. Wow, this is really simple. Of course, when someone talks to you, you simply don't interrupt them. But what's really interesting is when you actually try to focus on how often you interrupt someone else who is communicating with you, you'll find it happens a lot, especially if you're talking with them and you have a good point to make on top of what they're saying. You just have a tendency to interrupt them in the middle of their points. It's always better to pause. Now, why? It's always better to pause and listen. See, what most people do when they make a point or communicate is shy away from awkward silences. We're all afraid of awkward silences. So let's say you say something to your ex, and then there's that silence, and it stretches, and it's long, and it's awkward. And you just have to fill it. Instead, what you should do is kind of play the waiting game. Make your point and wait, and be okay with waiting. So more often than not though, the awkward silence isn't the huge problem. I'm finding a huge problem with our clients is the inability to wait patiently for the other person to finish their point. This is the ultimate standard of simply listening. Thing number 2, mirroring. Now what is mirroring? Well, it's simply when you take the last few words someone said to you and repeat them back. This sounds almost childish, but it's actually incredibly effective, and it goes a long way to indicate to the other person that you understand what they're going through. I'll give you an example of the mirroring technique that probably hits a little too close to home for you. So let's say that one of your best friends comes up to you and they say, I've been with my girlfriend for 10 years, but I think it's time for us to break up. I'm not in love with her anymore. And you pause. You use the effective pauses that we taught you in thing number 1. And then your friend says something along the lines of, man, I'm really worried it's going to be brutal. How do you mirror there? Do you simply state what they said back to you? No. What you should do is listen to each word of the statement and repeat the last few words back to them. So the last few words that your friend said was, it's going to be brutal. What you should do is nod your head and say, brutal. Yeah. By simply doing something like that, it indicates 2 things. Number 1, you're listening. Number 2, you understand what they're going through. You'll be so shocked at how often we find our clients fail to do this with their exes, the person who you're supposed to understand better than anyone else. By simply waiting, letting them finish their points, and then mirroring those points back to them. As odd and as technical and as robotic as it sounds, I promise you, it works. We have seen it work time and time again. And when you synergize it with thing number 3, you have sort of this holy trinity, awesome communication of beating resentment. So what is thing number 3? Thing number 3, labeling. Okay, so there's a lot to really talk about here with labeling. So what is labeling? Well, simply put, labeling is when you put on your detective hat and you try to understand what they're going through and label their emotions for them. So let's use your friend who's going through a breakup and doesn't want to break up with his girlfriend. What is he going through? Well, he's worried. But why is he worried? Well, he's worried because he doesn't want to be looked at as a bad guy or selfish. So what you need to do is you got to put your detective hat on, and then you have to kind of cause and effect it to try to find the source of what's causing their pain. But how do you label it to them? Well, we'll use the friend. So you got this friend who's worried about breaking up with his girlfriend because he doesn't want to be seen as a bad guy and he doesn't want to hurt her feelings. What you should do is label those exact things for him. Wow, it sounds like, and this is an important part because most of the time people says it sounds to me like, but by putting the me in there, it's kind of a first person word. I, me. Things like that aren't what we're going for here. We're trying to make everything about them. Wow, it sounds like you're really worried because you don't want to be seen as the bad guy. You don't want to hurt her feelings. That's labeling. And what you're really looking for here, you know you've labeled things correctly if they look at you and say, yeah, that's right. See, there's a difference between that's right and you're right. That's right implies that you got through to them to a core level. Saying you're right is what you say to someone to like, yeah, you're right, and then you never take action on it. So how can you use this with your ex? Well, simply put, when you do end up having a conversation with your ex-girlfriend who resents you, you need to show tactical empathy. You need to pause, listen. You need to start mirroring her so that she understands or he understands that you are hearing what they're saying. And then by labeling, you show your ex-partner that you understand their point of view. And that makes them rethink the way they thought of you. And that's how you defeat resentment. Now, obviously the timing of when you have these type of conversations and do these type of tactics is important. We didn't really cover that in this video. But before I kind of turn you to the resource that will help you figure out the timing of things, you actually probably need to go back to the beginning. And really the place we tell everyone to start is with our ex recovery chances quiz. So if you're interested in trying to figure out what kind of chance you have of getting your ex-girlfriend back, whether or not you should be trying to get them back, you can simply do that by looking in the description below and clicking the link you see there. Also, if you haven't liked, commented, or subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. You have no idea how much the subscribers and the engagement helps us grow. And we want to grow. We don't want you to resent us. Maybe that was a little too on the... No, I'm gonna leave now.